Welcome back again, my friend. I'm Ann Hayes, aka Mama G, co-creator, as I always say, along with the prime creator of Fiercely Fulfilled Feminine, where I help starseeds to heal sexual trauma, reclaim their power, and experience true fulfillment through what I call the sacred sexuality reclamation method. Now, today, I feel like today's topic is very on point and applicable, very appropriate. I'm going to speak specifically to P. Diddy, the whole trial, the docuseries, the individual trauma around sexual trauma, and also the collective wound around sexual trauma, and how that father wound plays into it. So we're going to go from the micro to the macro. I'm going to just tap in a little bit and kind of share some of how I see P. Diddy's own trauma showing up, how that is showing up within our collective consciousness. Talk about the patriarchy, the imbalance, and how there's actually a balance. We are in balance. So we talk about an imbalance, but yes, that yet there's actually an imbalance, excuse me, a balance, which is sustaining the false matrix. So I'm going to speak to that. And I'm also going to speak about how we can bring in the divine balance that brings us aligns us with the divine matrix. And then finally, how we can begin to resolve this these wounds, this individual wound, this collective wound. It's really being brought to the surface in a big way. So it's an opportunity. We can look at this as an opportunity. So let me just put this on airplane mode, my phone, before we continue. So first of all, who is P. Diddy? Well, even if you are not living in the United States and not from the United States, you probably have a good idea of who P. Diddy, Sean Diddy Combs, is. Puff Daddy. He has gone by a number of different names. He is to review, a hip hop mogul. He is an East Coast. He's from the East Coast. East Coast. I don't call him an East Coast rapper because I don't consider him a rapper. But anyways, I don't think he deserves that. And basically, he was the executive producer, founder of Bad Boy Entertainment. And obviously, he made it out to the West Coast, made it out to Hollywood, and he had a big presence there as well in the entertainment. If you name it, he was doing it. He was doing it, and became a multi-millionaire as a result. I don't think he quite met that billionaire status, at least not as far as a net. I don't want to say worth because we're all worthy, but yeah. So there's been okay, let me back up. This is who he is. This is who he was. Okay. And he was brought up last year on counts of sex trafficking and in particular racketeering conspiracy, which are both felonies and carry a life, anywhere from a 10-year to a life sentence. Pretty serious crimes to be charged of. And there was a subsequent trial. He spent 13 months in detention, and as of October of this year, so not too long ago, he was acquitted of the racketeering conspiracy charges, and he was acquitted of sex trafficking. However, he was convicted of 2 counts of transporting with the intent of prostitution. Okay, one involves Cassandra, her last name Ventura, and the other one is like a Jane Doe, unnamed, anonymous. However, there are 100 civil lawsuits right now accusing P. Diddy of basically sexual assault and anything and anywhere in between. So I think that's important to mention. So he is currently serving I think it was 50 months, 4 years. Does that equate to 4 years and 2? Anyways, 50 months in a low security, because that's important to mention as well, low security prison in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and it actually shares a military base. It's a joint military base, so I find that very interesting. So I just thought put that in there. I find that very interesting. So at any rate, 50 Cent, another well-known not another well-known East Coast rapper, because remember, I'm not going to identify P. Diddy as a rapper, and that's my own personal whatever. 50 Cent was an East Coast rapper from Jamaica, Queens, New York, and he's the executive producer of a Netflix docuseries related to this whole situation, related to Sean Combs. Related to Sean Combs. It's called Sean Combs, The Reckoning. And the reckoning in this instant means basically you're being punished or avenged for any past misdeeds. So I think it's a very appropriate title. And so that's just a little bit of background information. And clearly, with this whole P. Diddy accusation, the whole P. Diddy trial, the acquittal, the charges that stuck, the convictions serving. There's just a lot of energy around sexual trauma, sexual assault, sexual misery programs. And it's really bringing a lot to the surface for anyone who's experienced any level of sexual abuse, sexual trauma, which I'm going to tell you right now, it's been both men and women, boys and girls. And it has also been, obviously, it's just, I want to say 3 out of 4. It's probably, it's essentially everybody. If you're here, you have experienced it. As a woman, you have experienced the suppression of your sexual energy. That is sexual trauma because you are not able to access your creative life force energy, and it completely disempowers you. So this is very applicable at this time. So if I'm getting a little passionate, that's why. Okay. So, but before we get deeper into that, let's talk about the father wound. Clearly, if you look at the docuseries now, I've only watched the first 3 episodes. I have yet to watch the last one. And yet I feel like I already know what it's about because I've seen that movie Blink twice. If that was that the name of it? Anyways, yeah. Let's talk about the individual father wound, the collective, how that all plays in, the messages that you get as a result, that especially women get as a result of that, and men as well, and how it can be resolved. So this all ties in. I just want you to let you know it all ties in. So I want to make sure, however, that I remember, I'm just going to share this very, very quickly so I don't forget, because I know I didn't write this down. First of all, I highly encourage that you watch the docuseries. I suggest that you watch it, perhaps not before you go to bed, but that you do watch it because there's enough information there that I believe is truth and that is reality that could be very informative. It also has the ability to heal because it may trigger you personally in some way, like it did for me. So it can be very, very healing because of the triggering. And then what that can do is then empower you to begin to speak up and share your voice and share your story, not to like sit in the story, but to speak up. Because the more of us who speak up and share our stories, like those 100 people who were showing up with civil lawsuits in P. Diddy, the greater power we have as a collective. That's how we reclaim our power, reclaim our collective sovereignty. And that's everybody. So that's eventually going to include P. Diddy and anyone who is perpetrating or involved in the evil aspect of the collective shadow, which as well serves a purpose. However, let's bring it back around. So individual father wound can show up in a lot of different ways. Number one, direct abuse. And there's all different ways that can show up. Clearly, if it's sexual abuse, then that's sexual trauma, like from a very, your closest caregiver. Your closest caregiver. It could be an absent father who's abandoned the family and just walked out. Neglect, whether the dad is there or not, or the father figure just walked out and left. That's abandonment. And that is a deep, deep father wound right there. And that is something that P. Diddy experienced. He experienced the abandonment of his father, biological father, at a very, very young age. I say biological father, but I don't think there was ever stepfather in the picture. So he experienced that deep, deep wounding. So we can see how some of his trauma played out. And I'm going to bring that back around to show you how that kind of trauma can show up in a falsely empowered way. Because what is true success? At any rate, also a dad who or a father figure who is emotionally unavailable. They're not there like if you cry or something upsets you, they're not there to nurture you in a healthy way. Maybe they're not there to hugging you. They're not telling you how much they love you. Maybe they're judging and shaming you instead. Okay, perhaps, because of religious programming, and you're just, especially as a young woman, you're going out there and you're just expressing what naturally is meant to be expressed sexually, and then you are shamed for it. Okay, or it's wrong, or it's like you're evil, you're bad, you're a witch, you're this and that. So there's a lot of different ways it can show up. It could be perhaps the father figure has an addiction, or perhaps they go into these rages. And you've witnessed others like a parent or siblings being harmed. So even if you did not, for example, directly experience, for example, sexual trauma, if you witnessed that happening to someone else, if you witnessed, for example, a mother figure raped, or your mother raped, or sister raped, or you knew of some kind of sexual abuse, that is sexual trauma. Being exposed to porn at a young age is sexual trauma. That is neglect. That is a form of neglect. Unable to provide a sense of safety. Unable, maybe that, just wasn't around enough. Maybe there's guns in the house. Like I said, maybe the father figure had an addiction, or they were violent and aggressive or unpredictable. Maybe one sense, in one moment they were like kind and loving, and the next moment they were completely violent and aggressive. So unpredictability is trauma. Just poor modeling. Poor modeling. Okay, for me personally, in this dimensional reality, in this avatar, I experienced a sense of not feeling safe and not feeling protected, because what was going on with my sexual abuse involved another family member, not within this house in the same household, but it did involve another family member, a male, and I was not protected. And I believe there's, in sense, some denial there, or just things were too busy to really pay attention to what was going on in my life. In other words, I got basic needs. In other words, another way is if you just, like I said, not emotionally nurturing, not emotionally available, if you got your basic needs met, like you got food on the table, you got clothes, you got shelter, okay, yet you're not being nurtured in the way that you needed as a child, that is trauma. So essentially, any male role model, father figure in your life who either abused you or exposed you to unsafe situations or did not protect you from unsafe situations created trauma. Created trauma. And that's essentially what happened with P. Diddy. So let's go to the collective father wound, because this is when it gets really juicy. Okay. The collective father wound is this. We've got the mother, father, God of creation. God is not a he, God is not a she. God is a mother, father, he, she, androgynous. There are two energies, divine feminine, divine masculine. However, the divine feminine Christ, over 2,000 years ago, was removed from the equation, so to speak. She was completely taken out in a lot of different ways. I'm not just going to say like in text and this and that. Completely taken out, removed, suppressed. Because of the fear of the power of the divine feminine Christ, which comes through not just females, but all genders. We all need it, okay, to be truly balanced. That's a sacred inner marriage, is what we call it. That brings us back to the divine, to the source of our creation. So removed. Men, we're going to look at gender now, because in particular, men were considered superior to women. So there was the suppression of a divine feminine's innate abilities. There was the suppression of the divine feminine in women and the divine feminine in men. For example, let me give you some examples. The high priestess temples in Egypt and in other areas were turned into brothels. So these high priestesses, which would help through sexuality and sensuality to initiate and awaken, particularly men, were turned into brothels. So it was taken that the sacredness of sex and the purpose of sexual energy is the creative life force of the universe, and the energy to be able to spiritually awaken others was removed, and it was inverted. It was shamed, and it was inverted into just flat out prostitution. So now these women who are once these most revered high priestesses supporting spiritual ascension were turned into prostitutes, literally became sex slaves. Those were some of our first sex slaves, at least in the more recent times. You had ancient Jewish law, which basically, if a woman became pregnant out of wedlock, she was stoned. So you've got the baby inside, plus the woman being stoned. What happens to the guy? Nothing. Stoned. Ignoring the sacredness of a woman and a woman with child. So women were treated as possessions. They were treated as slaves for a very, very long time. There were laws where women were just like, they couldn't file for a divorce. They had certain roles within the family that they had and this wasn't just in the United States where I'm living now, it's just in many areas throughout the world. You could look at throughout Africa, many countries in Africa where today female genital mutilation still exists. And that's essentially what happens is a young girl, before she comes of age, she has I'm not going to say specifically how it happens, but basically the female genital mutilation, what it is done, what its intention is, I'm not going to share what they do, but is to literally suppress the sexuality of the woman so that she isn't like, or the young girl, so that she isn't like, what's the word? Obviously, they want to suppress it so that she's just a good little girl, because if a woman in many countries throughout Africa, and not just in Africa, have sex before marriage, all of a sudden they're deemed damaged goods. There's a stigma. It's not a good thing. If this happens, this girl can actually become killed. She's definitely ostracized, stigmatized, sent away, and could potentially even be killed, depending on the family. That is a possibility even today. So think about when a female is born into certain African tribes and African families, and this is a lot throughout the Middle East as well, is they are considered second-class citizens, inferior to men. They don't have many rights. It is changing. Okay, arranged marriages still exists. They still exist. And it's just seen that men just have, are able to give more to the family, because it is not yet recognized again the power of females and divine feminine energy. So we're coming to that reckoning as we speak. So that's the collective father wound, is that we've had this imbalance as far as divine feminine and divine masculine energy. However, it has, and let me see if I'm there again. Okay, I'm not quite there yet. I'll get to that in a minute about where the balance actually is. So what are the outcomes, or what is the effect of women in particular, and I'll get to the men as well and to other genders, is if you have been particularly directly sexually abused or sexually traumatized, or you're experiencing ancestral lineage of sexual trauma or the collective sexual trauma, there's messages of disempowerment. There's messages that say, you're not important, you don't matter, you're not capable, you're unworthy. Essentially, so just let others make the choices for you, because you don't have the power to do anything. So others need to step in and be that power for you. Completely disempowering, especially for females. on this planet. As far as men go and other in just genders in general, is that it suppresses the ability to be emotionally balanced, to regulate one's emotions, to be vulnerable, to be nurturing, to be compassionate and unconditionally loving. Those are all maternal aspects. Those all come from the mother God, the mother aspect of God and the divine feminine Christ. The intuitive aspect, the ability to rest, to receive, is a really important part of divine feminine energy, which is within all of us and which needs to be resolved within all of us. So let's look at the false matrix, the divine matrix, and how do we go about healing this imbalance? Well, first of all, the patriarchal system is the system that we've been under, and we are moving out of that into, we're not looking to completely eradicate it. We're simply looking to bring in some balance as far as, first of all, number one, making sure that patriarchal system is divine in nature and that it also is meeting divine feminine in an equal and balanced way. So it's taken toxic masculinity and toxic femininity, which have been a result of this patriarchal system and the repression of divine feminine Christ, and we're transmuting that and converting that and bringing that into divine masculinity, divine femininity in balance, so that we can transmute it, transfigure into the divine matrix. Okay, so let's look at currently what it's been, and it's changing. So there actually has been a balance. You see, when you have this false empowerment, when men are given the message, and we're not blaming men here, they've been programmed as well. All of a sudden, they've got this false sense of power that they are superior, that what they do matter more, what they do does matter more, that women should submit to their needs and their desires, that what they need to do, whatever, is more important. Is more important. So you have this false sense of empowerment. However, here's the deal. In order to maintain the balance, you need to have an equal amount of disempowerment. So this is where the balance has sustained the false 3D matrix. So this is where I'm bringing in the imbalance in these divine energies has actually had to create a balance in order to sustain the false matrix. So as many people who are falsely empowered, mostly men, in this patriarchal system that we are currently deconstructing, you had to have just as many women who were disempowered to maintain the 3D matrix. Okay? So what does false empowerment look like? It looks like success. It looks like, oh my goodness, money, power, this, that. It looks like true power, but it's really not. And I feel like I need to interject this right here before I continue. There is something known as attachment style theory. And the love avoidant, I'm not going to go into it. If you're here, you probably already are familiar with attachment style. There's the love avoidant, and then there's the anxious attached. The love avoidant, it is said in this theory, okay, by psychologists, psychiatrists, because they had degrees in all of this, so they must be the authority, right? Well, anyways, this is where I'm at. Says that the love avoidant tends to have a high self-esteem, and they tend to do very well in business, and they're very successful. Whereas the anxious attached tends to be completely disempowered. And that would be me. That was me. Here, a low self-esteem. You could have a high self-esteem to balance out the low self-esteem. No. It's not about true self-esteem. It's a false sense of power. Remember, it's false. The esteem is generated from external validation. That is P. Diddy. He is an example of any male or female, possibly, or anyone of any gender on this planet who is driven, yet insatiable to power, sex, money, control at whatever cost, because that's where their validation comes from. That is not a high self-esteem. That is a false sense of empowerment. By doing, being, trying to do more, be more, have more. That only perpetuates the false matrix, the 3D matrix, which is about competition, dominance, control, money, lust. Now, let me be careful with money, because money has its value. Lust has its value too. Too deeply embedded in the lower chakras, with the heart. It's not always aligned with integrity. It's not always aligned with the heart. That's not a high self-esteem. That's avoiding pain by using the distraction. See, those are addictions. The need to make money and more money can become an addiction, especially if it's one where one gets one sense of validation. Okay, so I felt like I really wanted to share that. So it is a lack of self-esteem, a lack of self-love, a lack of worthiness because of the trauma. Because of the trauma. Okay, so how do we bring this into divine balance? Okay, because ultimately what we desire, we don't want to keep a balance, sustained balance in the false matrix with falsely empowered and disempowered aspects of the collective. What we desire is to bring in balance where the divine feminine and divine masculine energies are showing up within each and every individual in the collective. Because what that will automatically do is bring us into the divine matrix. Sexual trauma will no longer exist. Sex trafficking will no longer exist. Sexual assault will no longer exist. And I'm not going to get into the deeper layers right now as to how this has been perpetuated and why that's just going to resolve itself. Not in this video. So each one of us can choose, number one, to heal, to look at our own trauma, to look at our life, to do a reevaluation, reflection, introspection. How has your life shown up? What are the echoes of your trauma? Step back. What have people been telling you? What feels misaligned? There's something, I know if you're here, there's something that has just felt off. And you may have identified it or not. What most people desire is connection. Deep, intimate love and connection. We all desire to be unconditionally loved, appreciated, to do the same for others, to be vulnerable, to be emotionally available, to connect at the deepest levels, and to feel the beauty of that. Harmonious union, peace. We want to be accepted for who we are just as we are. So even if we're going through a healing process, we want to be able to be supported through that. You don't need to be perfect in order to come into human union with somebody else and to support each other. In fact, there is strength in partnership. There is strength. And yet in order for it to be sustainable, depending on the extreme polarities and the depth of your trauma, you've got to do some sacred solitude and do some inner work on your own first. And I know that that's been my journey at this point. So heal, go within, heal your own trauma. Number two is get some knowledge. Learn about sexual energy. Learn about the divine feminine and what it means to balance the divine feminine within you. What is sacred sexuality? Why is sacred sexuality so important, and no matter what gender you are? Come back to the sacredness of it. And finally, three, when you feel comfortable enough, it's going to be important for you to speak up. Speak up with regard to your own abuse, your own sexual assault, your own trauma. Speak up, and the more who speak up, the safer it is to do so. The more that as a collective consciousness, we reclaim our sovereignty. And here's the deal, this is the power because it's all connected. We're an ecosystem, it's all connected. Energy, frequency, vibration. So when you automatically increase your overall vibrational frequency and you come into a deeper space of unconditional love and peace and vulnerability and non-judgment and harmony and unity within yourself, that sacred inner marriage, it automatically sends out a resonance like you become this tuning fork that automatically triggers and initiates somebody else to begin doing the same. And you don't even have to be there. You don't have to say anything. It's energetic in nature. It's happening. And that's why we're beginning to see all of this come to the surface. So that's a beautiful thing. That is a beautiful thing. Now, I just want to speak, before I conclude here, I'd like to speak to the opening episode with Sean Diddy Combs. This is where he was at. This is the false empowerment. False empowerment is literally such an inflated ego. It's a sense of grandiosity where you can do no wrong and you can just you can get yourself out of whatever situation it is, where you truly have not yet accepted accountability for your misdeeds and in the way that you have harmed others and the way you have focused on servicing yourself. And P. Diddy has done this to an extreme, and yet he's the tip of the iceberg. So when that opening episode, in the opening scene, this was September 10th, this was literally I think it was 6 days initially, 5-6 days before he was arrested and charged. And then it was probably another 13 months before he was actually convicted. Not all the charges, but anyways. So he's having a film crew follow him around. And he's talking about how he can just, he's upset because I just have to stop. He's not upset. He's faking. He's an actor. How is he going to get out of this one? Because he's been able to get out of a lot because of his ability to coerce, racketeer, blackmail. And I didn't know him, but I'm going to tell you how it functions. I know intuitively and energetically, this is what he was doing. He wasn't the only one. And yet, it's easier for us to accept perhaps him right now. Before we go to someone like a CD. You know, the music industry, you know who I'm talking about. Mr. CD. Okay? Anyways, so he's lying. He's being completely manipulative. He's being deceptive, coercive. He's lying to himself. He's not yet ready to take accountability, you see, because if he had to turn around and confront his own demons and his own pain, it would probably be too much for him to bear just now. And it's up to him whether he chooses to eventually do that or not. He might not. But to think, and he's, all these people out there who think they can just buy and coerce and blackmail their way out of their misdeeds is about control, a false sense of empowerment, deception. And so it's up to every one of us to speak up and not allow this gaslighting, manipulation, and these lies and this deception to continue. Okay. Let me get the smile back. There it is. Throw in a comment. Keep it nice. Keep it civil. That's where I'm at today. Here's the deal. My specialty is helping you, especially women, to reclaim the sacredness of your sexuality, to help to dissolve the sexual misery programs on the planet. So if you're here, there's a reason. So there's a link in that description. There are many links. However, there's a specific link for an upcoming free 5-day masterclass starting December 8th, 2025, this Monday, next Monday. It's Awaken the Goddess Within You, tapping into sacral energy. You see, the sacral chakra is the first portal of transmutation. That is where we get it going. Let's jumpstart it. Let's balance that out. Let's make it divine. Let's make it sacred once again, because that's where your true power is. That's where you find your authentic voice, because it's all connected. And so if this feels like it's aligned for you and this message today and whatever else I've been sharing resonates, grab that link and don't hesitate to share it. It's time. It's time. I love you so much. We've got this. We've all got this as a collective. Let's come into balance within the divine matrix with divine feminine and divine masculine energies. Peace. Let's do this. Let's do this.